watching the Strawhats return to Water 7, which led me to believe that this arc will be super chill. And then Oda steps in like, here's Garp and an older Koby. Oh yeah, and he's actually his grandfather. Oh, and by the way, Dragon is his father. Oh, and Smoker's here too. Oh, and Hockey, yes, that's a thing. Blackbeard? Yep, he got a devil fruit. Oh, and let's literally split heaven and earth while we're at it. Hello my fellow weebs and welcome back to the One Piece saga. The series covering my never-ending journey of watching through One Piece for the very first time, giving my thoughts on it and ranking each arc in a tier list to determine which is unquestionably, definitively, and definitely not just in my opinion, the best one. As per usual, if you have any questions regarding the format, the first video in the series will likely answer it. But today, we have an arc that absolutely blew my expectations out of the water in every single sense. But before we get to that, I've decided on a fairly major change to the series, so drum roll please. From now on, we are skipping all filler. Personally, so far, I had viewed the fillers as these fun side adventures with lower stakes, but as of late, especially now that the larger story is becoming more clear, I can't help but feel like they're merely speed bumps and I honestly just don't enjoy them anymore. So instead of them filling the bottom tiers, we'll be sticking to the canon story, which I hope will make this series more enjoyable for all of you as well as myself. But returning to the question at hand, the past two arcs have both shot up straight to the S tier, so this arc surely has to be a little more chill, right? Well, there's only one way to find out, so let us jump straight into Post Enies Lobby. Let me just start off by saying that this arc has absolutely no right to be as brilliant as it is. Picture me, coming off of the insanity that was Enies Lobby, watching the Strawhats return to Water 7, which led me to believe that this arc will be super chill. And then Oda steps in like, here's Garp and an older Koby. Oh yeah, and he's actually his grandfather. Oh, and by the way, Dragon is his father. Oh, and Smoker's here too. Oh, and Hockey, yes, that's a thing. Blackbeard? Yep, he got a devil fruit. Oh, and let's literally split heaven and earth while we're at it. Yeah. I was not prepared for this at all. But anyway, let's try to go through it as we usually do. We opened the arc with what for me was already a pretty large surprise. The crew returning to Water 7. Similar to what we talked about in both the Enies Lobby as well as the Water 7 video, so far we haven't really had a location where the Strawhats just chill out for a bit. For the most part, there's some sort of problem to be handled, and by the end of the arc, we are either escaping or simply moving on to the next adventure. So us actually returning to the city caught me off guard straight away. Soon after, we see that the Strawhats have basically become celebrities in the city, which may seem nice on the face of it, but it obviously implies that they are drawing much more attention. And a nice touch here is that we don't actually see the Strawhats themselves for a good 10 minutes of the first episode. We mostly get a check-in with the Gali Law, Franky, as well as Usop, who's still trying to figure out a way of formally rejoining the crew. Finally cutting to the Strawhats, and I'll be honest, I don't know why I found this funny, but we see all of them repping that Gali Law merch. So yeah, hashtag ad. Though they are soon joined by Franky, who we find out spent the money they stole all the way back in Water 7 to buy this mythical Adam treasure tree on the black market, revealing that it is the strongest tree in the world and that it is being used for their new ship. And yes, just like I've said for previous statements like these, something tells me that it will end up not being the strongest type of wood in about 500 episodes or so. Though jokes aside, I do think that this substantial jump in the quality of the ship, which we'll talk about a little more later, is kind of a double-edged sword. It works as a brilliant way to introduce Franky, that's for sure, but at the same time, it does not leave a lot of room for improvement. Though yes, a little more on this in a bit. This entire thing is interrupted as Zoro runs in telling the crew that the Marines are already here, And so we get the first major bombshell of this arc. We see Vice Admiral Garp, which I think we've only seen briefly in the Diary of Koby Meppo arc. And before I could even think about potentially seeing Koby, Luffy just calls him Grandpa. And just like that, we find out that this dude is Monkey D. Garp. Okay, so yeah, that explains why he didn't tell the other Marines about Koby knowing Luffy, I guess. Needless to say, I most certainly did not expect this. Though as we see more and more of these people with D in their name, a theory of its implications is still brewing. More on this in a bit. Though just like Luffy and kind of what we saw back in the aforementioned Koby arc, Garp is wacky to say the least, as we see this absolutely brilliant scene of the both of them just falling asleep right there. And taking a step back from the story itself for a second, I've absolutely loved seeing Garp in the story. Pretty much every scene he's been a part of, though admittedly it's been quite few, have all been great. Whether it's because of his quite humorous antics or him accidentally saying something he shouldn't have, a la Hagrid. But yeah, just overall, Garp gets a big thumbs up. Cutting back to the story though, he casually drops another major reveal, the existence of these 4 Emperors of the Sea. And oh boy, once he mentioned that the 7 warlords and the Navy have allied in an attempt to ensure some sort of power balance, I couldn't help but think about my all-out war theory, which I've been going on about for the past few episodes. Also, and I'm not sure if it's something I might have missed, but we see Robin react to Shanks' name being brought up, which made me think whether there's still a part of her history we do not know. This could of course just be Robin knowing her stuff, but it seems a bit sus. Though once again, this too is interrupted as Zoro rushes in thinking that the Strawhats are already being attacked. 2 yet unknown people try to counter him, but are quickly beaten. And of course, we find out that these 2 are Koby and Meppo. And sheesh, have they had a glow up. Which actually brings me on to a question. How long has it been since Luffy set out on his quest? Looking back at the first episodes, although much of it is probably due to animation just getting a ton better, the characters do look quite a bit younger, so how old actually are they and how long have they been together? I don't think we've ever really been given an explicit age for any of them or how long their journey has been, so yeah, this was kind of a bonk over the head that, yes, things have changed a lot since they first met. Though before we get any sort of proper reunion between them, Garp once again casually drops, "Hey, I heard you met your dad back in Logtown." And when everyone on the crew is a bit baffled and asks what exactly does he mean, he nonchalantly follows up with, "The name of your father is Monkey D. Dragon, the Revolutionary." I'm sorry, what? I swear, when I said, "What, are we going to find out the dragon is his father now? And Gold Roger is his long-lost uncle who gave him cool presents on Christmas?" That was the most stupid throwaway joke I could think of and was never supposed to be any sort of prediction. But yay, I guess I got that right? I didn't, but I did? Though with that said, go get your tinfoil because it is time for theories. So far, every single character we've met that has D in their name has had an unbreakable will. Saul went against the Marines to uphold what he believed to be justice. Now we find out the dragon is a revolutionary, so despite how correct his beliefs may be, he obviously has a strong enough will to quite literally go against the entire world to pursue. Roger literally became the king of the pirates. Ace and Blackbeard, actually we'll get to them in just a little bit, but you get the idea. Each and every one of these characters has this unbreakable drive to pursue either their dream or, like in Garp's case, what he believes to be right. But then we take Koby. Someone who started as a whiny little kid with a dream, and now, in his very brief fight against Luffy, we see him use shave, a technique that we literally had not seen until the deadliest assassins of the world government showed up. And I know this is coming out of absolutely nowhere, but Koby's drive to become an admiral is just as strong as Luffy's becoming the king of the pirates. So, what if we were to find out that Koby is actually one of the Joestars as well? Yes, I did spin this out of seeing him for like, 5 episodes throughout the entire series, but come on. You can't give me a mystery as intriguing as this and expect me not to come up with some bogus theories. But yeah, now we just know the dragon is actually Luffy's father and Garp is Dragon's father, which, like, that's one interesting family, isn't it? The only thing we need to find out now is that Nami is actually a past version of Luffy's mother, who is in fact a time traveler? Yeah, I'm not even going to try and guess who his real mother is. Following this, we get to see Luffy and Koby just catch up for a bit, and once again I thought we'd get to chill out for a bit, but no. First off, we learned that the Navy actually has a technique of going through the calm belt, something that had been thought up by this researcher named Dr. Vegapunk, the person responsible for finding a way of feeding the devil fruits to objects, among other things. Which leads me on to a question of what in the world of One Piece actually has more quote-unquote power. Is it the Navy or is it the world government? I just assumed that it would have to be the world government, but judging by the things we've heard so far, it doesn't appear to be as simple. As in this case, it is indeed the Navy who have made these discoveries. But then, we get something that left my head spinning. The mention of the second half of the Grand Line titled The New World. That is very, very big. I'm calling it now. You know the war I've been going on about 50 times per video? How can you name something the New World and then not make a story about the war for the New World? It's happening, definitely, and no, I won't take off my tinfoil. Though jokes aside, I guess this is our first look at what the endgame of One Piece is going to look like, right? Or actually, not quite, I guess, as I'm still like a third of the way to being caught up, but you get the idea. The fact that it is explicitly named something so different from the Grand Line itself does make me wonder about just how different will it be. Is this going to be another transition on the level of the Grand Line itself? Are we going to be replacing the log poses with, I don't know, log pose 2 electric boogaloo now with 300% more log? Is weather going to be brutal, or maybe it's almost like the calm belt where nothing moves? Yeah, I don't know, my head was spinning already and we're barely into this arc yet. Following this exchange between Luffy and Koby, we finally get a breather as we see the Strawhats throwing a party. And there's a ton of great shots here. We get the absurd scene of Luffy and Chopper just stuffing their faces. Then there's the wide shot of them all jamming out to Sogeking's theme and many others. Though, you know how I said we'd get to chill? Yeah, we don't, because Robin is called by Aokiji. I think the fact that this is the smallest twist in the arc says a lot, but in short, we find out that Saul was actually a friend of Aokiji's, further making me wonder just who he actually is. It's clear that he's not really 100% on the side of the world government or the Navy, but it's not like he's helping the Straw Hats either, so what's the deal? Though thankfully, he is not here to cause any sort of trouble, he simply tells her to live her life to the fullest and to carry on the legacy of Ohara. This was just a very nice conclusion to the part of Robin's story we saw, and sort of elaborated on why Aokiji saved her as a kid. So yes, big thumbs up in my book. But we then see her turn around to see the Straw Hats acting super silly again and just smiles. So yes, that was just super wholesome. Though once again, just as I thought things were calming down, we jump over to the 5 Elder Stars where we hear about an emergency. That being that one of the 4 emperors has broken through their lines and is about to make contact with another, That, of course, being Shanks, who talked about going to see Whitebeard all the way back in Jaya. And what follows is yet another series of bombshells. Though in a meta sense, I absolutely love how the series handles this entire thing. Obviously, it's a huge thing for the viewer and the story, and as such, the beginning of this grand meeting is spliced in with the Navy on high alert, finally ending with the phrase, "We don't know what will happen from now on." In universe, this is obviously a gigantic event, so I love that that tension was passed on to us as well. As for the meaning itself, are you ready to join me in my insane pursuit to analyze every single detail of the sequence? Great, let's go. As Shanks walks past the men on the ship, many of them fall unconscious merely at his presence. And this is where we first hear the word hockey. My Japanese is not good enough for me to know whether this is an actual word or not, and for obvious reasons I won't try to look it up. But as far as I can tell, it just appears to be like conviction or something like that. Obviously it has some sort of psychic effect, and where have we seen that before? Precisely. Is this another form of mantra? Or is mantra another form of hockey? In Shanks' case, we see him make people faint, but then we see him dodge the big bottle of sake Whitebeard throws at him, almost like he could predict its movement. So, are we finally getting some hints as to how the mantra worked? Maybe, though these aren't really hints as much as they are more mysteries. But on top of that, if it is indeed some sort of conviction or will, wouldn't Luffy and the other Ds by default have the most powerful forms of it? I mean, that is their whole shtick, right? But more on this in a bit. Hello, this is Editing Koroto butting in. I was thinking more about how this entire hockey thing might work when I remembered that scene back in Romance Dawn, when Shanks quite literally stares off a sea monster, so is that the same hockey? I mean, if it can make groups of people faint, maybe it's enough to send the monster running. And if this is right, then Oda is seriously a mad genius. Anyway, back to the video. But okay, we're like 3 seconds into the scene, let's move on. The next thing we hear is something that most certainly seems a bit sus to me. We see Whitebeard list off a few names: Roger, Garp, and Sengoku. And continuing by saying that not many people who know about that era remain. First off, is it a stretch to say that Sengoku is likely a Joestar? It seems kinda weird that 2 out of 3 of those names are ones we know for a fact are of the D name. So does he also share that, or maybe he's an exception? Well anyway, once again we hear talk of this ambiguous period of time about which not many even know. And I'm assuming that this is the same blank century we heard about in Robin's story. Though that still leads me to the question of what happened there for even Roger's name to be brought up. Perhaps it has something to do with the origins of the devil fruits? If you indulge me in another tinfoil theory, as I talked about in Skypiea, perhaps all the poneglyphs when read together explain how a devil fruit can be created or acquired. So the government has now done everything they can to wipe it from history. In terms of reasoning, I think it makes sense. They obviously wouldn't want anyone being able to just whip up devil fruits for everyone they know, as that would seriously upset the power balance in the world. Though who knows, at this point it could still be absolutely anything. Returning to the meeting, we then move on to them reminiscing a little, specifically talking about how Shanks and Buggy used to be a part of Rogers' crew, and that Shanks would go head to head with Hawkeye. Following up by saying that when Shanks lost his arm, everyone was shocked about who'd be capable of doing that to him. And oh boy, my face when I realized that no one knows that he lost his arm to save Luffy was like, you know a character is an absolute Chad when the only scars they have is a betrayal and when they save someone else, right? But him following up with, I made a bet on a new era, was just the cherry on top. Though I do want to re-emphasize the importance of this small, almost throwaway line. This is someone who can make people faint merely by walking past them. A person who's gone head to head with Hawkeye, been a member of Rogers' crew, and is calmly coming to Whitebeard, the only person we know who could go head to head with Roger and is making his own demands. Yet still, when he brings up Luffy, he calls that a bet on a new era. The amount of trust he has in him is absolutely nuts. And maybe, just maybe, the fact that Luffy was indeed one of the Joestars with the explicit goal of becoming the king of the pirates immediately made Shanks certain that he is going places. But alright, we still haven't even gotten to the main part. They then move on to talk about Blackbeard and how he was only a part of Whitebeard's crew out of convenience. As soon as he got what he wanted, he betrayed them and left. Based on what we find out very shortly, this sounds like when he acquired his fruits, which in and of itself is already a major deal, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. What's more important here is how Shanks straight up says, with his will, he will eventually get to the top. Based on what he has said about Luffy just a few short moments before, I think it's safe to assume that Shanks realizes that purely due to Blackbeard being a Joestar, he poses a very real threat to everyone, which is exactly why Shanks asks Whitebeard to call off Ace. Since if he were to be defeated by Blackbeard, it's almost a guarantee that Luffy would have something to say about it, and things would get very complicated. Though in a broader sense, it very much feels like Blackbeard is being set up as a major antagonist that we will definitely not be going up against anytime soon. But at the same time, I think he is being purposely written to be exciting to follow. Yes, we have barely seen any of him, but from what we know so far, he doesn't have any super unlikable bad guy traits or anything like that. I'd go even as far as to say he is pretty much a more calculated and, I guess, evil version of Luffy, in that he will cross people to get what he wants, but he is just as dedicated to his goals as Luffy. But then we get to the climax. As Whitebeard says that there is no way he can just let Blackbeard go after he broke the most important rule of the crew. And we see the two lock swords and quite literally split the sky. This could just be an absolutely brilliant moment to convey their power, or perhaps this is actually foreshadowing a more serious conflict between the two. You know, perhaps an all-out war? But yes, this is most certainly a shift's keys. And by the way, that's Usop, right? Perhaps now that things are seriously heating up, we may actually see him meet Usop. Though yeah, this entire sequence has to be up there with my favorite moments in the entire series so far. If you've been following the series, you will have probably noticed that I will almost always be more interested in the grand and macro scale stories instead of the pure one-on-ones. So us slowly but surely getting an idea of what's to come was absolutely awesome. And I think the fact that I've spent almost 2 whole pages of a script talking about like a 10-minute scene should say enough. Following this, we get 3 filler episodes, one of which I actually found pretty cool. It's all about Sanji figuring out what makes this guy's old cooking so much better. Personally, I thought the answer was pretty obvious. But it turns out that it's the salt that accumulates on roofs post Aqua Laguna. That's pretty much the premise of the episode, but it was actually fun, as again, it's sort of a world-building element that makes Water 7 unique. Though the other episodes, not so much fun. Returning to the canon though, we get some more of Franky's thoughts on what he wants this ship to be and why he's even building it. The whole exchange between Iceberg and Franky here was very nice to see, considering we had never really delved into their interpersonal dynamic too much in Water 7. We then cut to Usop, who is still circling around the Galley Law House and writing scenarios on how he might talk to Luffy again. And then there's this brilliant scene of Nami being like, oh, there was a noise or something outside, and just proceeds to close the curtains right in his face. That gave me a good chuckle. Cutting back to Franky and Iceberg, they finally get down to the real conversation. What exactly is Franky going to do once the ship is complete? Obviously, I was already completely convinced that he would be joining the crew, but seeing him work through this clash between leaving what he believes to be his only home and pursuing his dream of sailing across the world on a ship he himself has built was awesome, and just cemented that Franky isn't some comedic relief type of character who will pop a soda out of his stomach, and is just as complex as the rest of the crew. What makes this whole thing more difficult for Franky is that this is, as far as we know, pretty much the first time he's actually on good terms with pretty much everyone, and right away he has to choose whether he wants to leave that behind. As for the crew, we see that the log post has been set and all that's left is the ship. And so it's time to hear where we are headed next. An island on the bottom of the ocean, simply titled Fishman Island. As to what exactly the bottom of the ocean actually means, I've got no idea. Sure, there was Skypiea, that was literally a sky island, but devil fruits and water don't really mix, so I'm not sure whether we're going the Nazjatar route of having this hole in the ocean and there just being this massive wall of water, or is it actually going to be underwater? Either way, sounds like a very cool and creative setting to say the least. Though we also hear of the Florian Triangle, a location where hundreds of ships go missing every year. Basically all we know so far is that some sort of spooky things happen there and ships go missing. And hey, we have to go straight through it to get to Fishman Island, so we shouldn't have to wait too long to find out what it's all about. A short while later, Franky announces that the ship is complete, but before we get to see it, the Franky family arrives with some more news. The fact that the bounties for the Strawhats have been updated. Though perhaps more importantly, it's not just that they've been updated, but the fact that now each and every one of them, including Franky, are wanted. Luffy, of course, most of all, with a cool 300 million bounty, making the crew's total over 600 million berries. So yes, that is a big ol' yikes. Though we do get the absolutely brilliant image that is Sanji's wanted photo. With how much he was excited to finally be wanted, I really laughed at this way longer than I'd like to admit. Now I'm just curious as to how long it will actually stay that ridiculous, or maybe it will become a running gag of all of his wanted posters being absolutely horrid. Though with the ship ready and the obvious danger that is their massive bounties, the Strawhats get ready to leave Water 7. Only problem is, we still have not heard from Usop, and it's pretty clear that Franky still isn't fully on board either. Though before we tackle those problems, we get to see the new ship, later to be named the Thousand Sunny. And oh boy, is it an upgrade to the Mary. We're of course yet to find out about all of its capabilities, but from what we've seen so far, it's a major upgrade. Which leads me on to the question of whether this is the final ship. I mean, it can't be, right? We've got 600 more episodes. But at the same time, it's apparently made from the world's strongest wood and made by the two world's greatest shipwrights, so what else even is there? For now, it's more so a rhetorical question as we know barely anything about the ship, and hey, it can always be destroyed by, you know, someone like Blackbeard in an all-out war? Just saying. As for Franky, Iceberg just tells the Strawhats that they will have to force Franky into going. Otherwise, he will not pursue his true dream of sailing across the world on his own masterpiece. It's clear to Iceberg that Franky wants to go, but he still feels guilty about what happened to Tom. And so, Luffy takes that into stride, and we get this ridiculously brilliant sequence of him stealing Franky's pants, culminating in Robin using some very forbidden techniques to, let's say, persuade him into joining. And as it finally becomes clear that Franky will indeed come with them, Iceberg tells him to start living and finally forgive himself, reminding him that what happened to Tom is not his fault, and if anything, he is carrying on his legacy by building the greatest ship, not for a pirate, but simply because it is a masterpiece. Though neither the goodbyes or formal welcomes can take too long, as we find out that Garp was sent to capture the crew after all, so once again we set out. Only problem is, Luffy has still not heard from Usop. And here we once again see Zoro re-emphasize what he said in Water 7. This is what being a captain means, by telling Luffy that if he just lets him rejoin the crew without apologizing, Zoro himself will leave. And despite everything that happened, we see that Luffy just cannot give up on his friends, as we see him super jittery and nervous about hearing from Usop. Though when he finally arrives and tries to call to them as if the events of Water 7 never happened, the crew has to ignore him. And oh boy, did I love this sequence. We get the very real threats of Garp opening fire on the crew, but at the same time, we have that emotional turmoil of seeing how their friendship will finally play out. Especially as we see Usop slowly but surely drop that, this time figurative, mask, and finally calling out to Luffy and admitting that he was wrong. Luffy, of course, crying out of happiness himself, quite literally extends an arm to Usop, and just like that, the Strawhats, after so many trials and tribulations, are finally back together. Though it's not sunshine and rainbows just yet, as the ship is still being absolutely hammered by Garp. Though Luffy calmly calls to him saying that it was nice to see him, and that they are basically peacing out. Franky then demonstrates one of the many thousand sunny capabilities as the ship just flies straight out of there. And so with that, we set off for the new world. Though before we wrap this arc up, we still check in with Ice Pops, who's now become a certified bro. And we see that Water 7 is basically back to normal. Though we then cut to a mysterious island on the Grand Line, only to see my main man Smoker and Tashigi, who after seeing the Bounties says that he will crush the crew in the new world. I think I've made it pretty clear by now, I absolutely love seeing Smoker, so the confirmation that we can indeed expect to see more of him is awesome. We then cut to the homes of the Strawhats as everyone we've met reacts to the crew's new bounties. And two things to mention here. I really like that Vivi appeared here as well, as I kind of feel like she has been a little forgotten since Alabasta. I still hope that at some point she may rejoin the crew, but for now it's just a very brief look at her reaction. Though the other, of course much more major thing, is that we cut to Monkey D. Dragon, the world's most heinous criminal. I am willing to bet that everything here, including the land of white soil Baltigo, is some sort of hint as to what we can expect from him, but I am honestly clueless. The only thing I'm questioning here is whether he is a criminal because he is going against the world government, or is he actually a bad dude? The word revolutionary obviously has some negative connotation, so I am extremely curious to see what he's all about. Hopefully sooner rather than later, by which I mean not another 300 episodes until we see him, thank you very much. But then we cut to Blackbeard, and I was not ready for this. We see him react to Luffy's bounty going up, and by the looks of it, they're more than happy to go and take him on straight away. Though we see that Ace, despite Shanks' fears, has been sent after him. And what follows is, as the narration says, a historical event. Pretty much straight away they get to fighting, but in a weirdly similar way to Luffy, Blackbeard warns his crew to get out of Dodge and that they can take on Ace. What's more is that we find out exactly what happened on Whitebeard's ship. Blackbeard was only there until he found the exact type of devil fruit he wanted. He then killed one of their crewmates and set off on his own. And before we move any further, many questions arise here. Based on what we heard in Enies Lobby, not even the world government knows how to differentiate between what fruit does what. So is Blackbeard way ahead of them in that sense? When he begins to explain what his fruit does, it's clear that he's extremely educated on this topic. So might we expect something completely new from him that will shake up the rules of the fruits themselves? We already know that they can be fed to objects. So perhaps he will arm himself with devil fruit weaponry to completely offset the kiss-curse nature of his own fruit? Something light-based, for example, the complete opposite of his fruit? Or maybe my multiple fruits theory might still be alive after all. No, I won't give it up. Yes, I know we were told that it literally blows you up, but come on, Blackbeard's a Chad, he can take it. Anyway, we find out what is perhaps the biggest bombshell of all. The fact that as long as they are in contact with his darkness, his fruit gives him the ability to negate any and all devil fruit powers. So he is literally a walking sea prism stone with the power to straight up create a black hole. The destructive power of his fruit alone is enough to send his own crew running for their lives, as the entire town they were just standing in is reduced to nothing. But the added ability of just turning off the devil fruit user's power, especially for Logi and Paramethea types who would normally shift forms, is terrifying. Take Luffy for example, he fights hand to hand, but if Blackbeard gets even remotely close to him, he can literally grab his arm and stab him with a plain old sword, and that's the end of Luffy. So yes, that is very strong. Though I also love that there is a substantial drawback to his power, that being that he quite literally pulls in all attacks. So technically speaking, if you can muster up a single strike powerful enough to end Blackbeard, you win, making him the absolute glass cannon type of fighter. But wow, the albeit brief fight between Ace and Blackbeard was simply brilliant. And the shot of Ace just standing there with this torch in the all-consuming darkness was amazing. But what was perhaps my favorite detail of all? When Whitebeard and Shanks locked swords, they split heaven. Well, when two people with the inherited will meet, they split the earth. So yes, that was not an over-exaggeration of this arc literally splitting heaven and earth. But yeah, I mean, I was left speechless, and this shot is absolutely worthy of the chef's keys. Though the very last scene we get is a little bit of narration, saying that this was not merely a fight between two pirates, but a catalyst to something far greater. Obviously, this is pretty much Blackbeard formally starting a war against Whitebeard, but something tells me it's far bigger than that. Again, this is a Joestar we're talking about. While I'm all out of ideas on how this might play out in the short term because the Strawhats are still a ways off, if you want my long-term wish as to how this would play out, it's a three-way war between the Navy, Whitebeard, and Blackbeard. I would expect that after realizing the devastating power of Teach, especially after he gets another fruit, which will definitely happen, you know, maybe even two, others will stand by Whitebeard in an attempt to stop him. But as a vacuum of power is created, some might start inner conflict, fighting for the positions of the four emperors and ultimately leading to my dream all-out big war. It makes sense, trust me. And that is Post Enies Lobby. I think judging by the amount of stuff I had to say about this arc and how short it actually is, the ranking of it should be fairly predictable. It will be taking the top A tier spots and causing quite a few additional changes in the tier list. I spent way more time than I'd like to admit thinking about how this arc changes my thoughts on various of the previous ones. I even went and took a shower, and when shower thoughts get involved, you know it was serious. But in short, arcs like Logtown and Diary of Koby Meppo move up due to their importance in playing into the larger narrative, such as Dragon just popping up that early, etc, etc. I was very tempted to move up Romance Dawn, which I honestly might end up doing by the time the next video comes out, as the whole hockey thing and Shanks never telling anyone that he lost his arm saving Luffy are both brilliant details that carry significantly more weight in the context of what we know now. And I did debate ranking this as S tier, but I feel like that should be reserved for arcs where there is a big villain, which there really isn't in this arc. I mean, yeah, there's Garp, but he's not really a big bad. But with that, our next stop is the spooky thriller's bark. And that's the video. I know I said this the last time, but wow, the Water 7 saga has been something else entirely. If this is the rate at which the story will be moving from now on, I really don't know how I'll be handling the tier list. Though other than that, as usual, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. Speaking of which, let us give a warm welcomes to the newest members of the team, Van Ra and Cracker. Seriously, thank you. And if you wish to join the highly coveted Mystery Shack Insiders Club, you can do so for as little as $1 per month. And last but not least, let us do the usual test to see how many of you stuck around until the very end of this very long video. Leave a comment, whatever it may be, and include the words, Garp told me that. Let's see what you come up with. Though if you enjoyed the video, please share it and click all the YouTube buttons. And now, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. This is the final piece to my full-on war theory I've been going on about.